Is this supposed to do this? I don't think so. Let's fix that. What's up guys, my name is Andy. In this video, I gotta go after why the horn is honking when I turn the steering wheel. I recently replaced the steering wheel with this new unit, and I noticed that the horn, little sensors on behind the hub here, they looked a little worn. Everything looked like it maybe needed to be replaced. As soon as I put this on, go out for a drive, and start turning the corner, the horn start going off. That's kind of embarrassing. So what I want to do is I'm going to take the steering wheel off and go in there, and I bet you we need to replace that wiring harness that connects the horn and unfortunately the blinkers, all that. So let's go in there and start taking this apart, take a look at it. To get to the wiring inside the hub here, we need to go and take the steering wheel off. And I've got several of these little 3/16 screws on here holding this hub on, or holding the steering wheel onto the hub. So let's get this off first. All right, the horn button just pops out. There's these little little spring things that just kind of hold it in the hub here. Just disconnect the wires. This is a good time to remind you to unplug or to disconnect the battery, because if I were to touch these right now, it would honk the horn, but we already disconnected the battery. Now we want a 15/16 socket on here. It should just be able to, there we go, take this off. Okay, so what I was looking at when I did this hub with the steering wheel is this connector here looks worn down. This one doesn't look too bad. This one looks worn. In fact, it's got a sharp edge to it. And if you look on the back here, you can kind of see the wear patterns already of these two little connectors on the back here of this hub. And you know, look, this inner one, it's right on the very edge, and then over here it kind of comes off of this copper and almost looks like it's touching the other side. And I bet you that's what's happening, is that when I turn the wheel, I get to the right spot where this connector, because it runs on the inner side here, the way this is set up, that this is just a little too far out, and it's touching the other copper pad here, and that's creating that circuit and closing it like we were honking the horn. And I bet you that's what's going on. So what I want to do is I'm going to replace this whole setup, because unfortunately you can't just replace these little pieces. You have to replace this whole setup, and that means the wiring with all this. So what we need to do is, first thing we need to do, we can unscrew this because this has to come off. And then there's a couple of screws in here that we're going to want to take out, and then we need to loosen this hub, slide that down so we can get this wire part out. And then at the very bottom of the steering column, there's two plugs that we need to disconnect, and then pull the plastic, you know, the plug part from the wiring, and disconnect the little clips inside there so that we can pull the wiring harness through the steering column. We'll cover that in a minute, but let's get this part off. Now from here, we need to go down and we need to disconnect the wiring harness from underneath the dash and then pull the wires out of those plugs. So let's do that. First, you got to take the seat out, because you just can't get underneath these dashes without taking these seats out, unfortunately. So let's do that first, then we'll get to the wiring harness underneath the dash. So now we're underneath the dash here, and you can see the wiring harness coming out of the bottom of the steering column, and there's these two plugs. And before you unplug, well, actually you can go ahead and unplug them because it doesn't matter. These are the two plugs that we want to separate the wires from, and so we can pull them through the steering column. And what I did, before we pull the wires out, you need to know which wires are where. And on this plug, there's a tab right here, kind of a little piece that sticks out. And then on same thing on this one, there's another, on the smaller one, there's a line there. So I use that as a reference. And I created a sheet to, you know, knowing where the line was and what wire colors are what, so that we can put them in the right thing. But this, I try to get overcomplicated, and this is almost confusing to know which wire is where. So what I did is I redid it with something a little more simple. So what I want to do is I'm going to start pulling the wires out of each of the back here, you're gonna have to use like a little flat screwdriver or a little pick, and there's a little tab inside. There's a little metal clip that these plug into. Pull each one out, and once you get these pieces separated, then we can go ahead and pull this through the steering column. And the trick is to use a flathead screwdriver, and on the edge here of this wire, there's a little bit of a tab, and you press on that, and then you can pull the wire out from the back of the clip and expose the wires like that. So we do the same thing on this, and then we can pull it through the steering column. All right, and then once you pull the last one off, we can go ahead, actually we don't need this on there. Now we can feed this through and pull out the other end. And we can just continue pulling this all the way up through here. And there you go. Now this is out. Let's go look at the bench and finish taking this out of the hub. All right, so, and then we can just push this through, and it should just disconnect here from this little tiny support piece. And then you pull this all the way through, and then we're gonna wanna keep this, but this is no good to us anymore, particularly because of these ends there. Now you can really see how worn out that edge is. This one's not too bad, but this one's really worn out. So this is gonna be the new one we're gonna put in here. There's the part number, if you guys see that. And this is the same thing as what we had in the car, just a new version. And it's got the already new connectors. Now what we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna wanna tape these up to make it, to slide it down the steering column easier so these edges don't catch on stuff. Let's fish it through here real quick. And it wouldn't hurt to put a little bit of grease in here. Just gonna use some of this Super Lube multi-purpose synthetic grease and just put just the smallest little bit in there. We don't need hardly anything. There we go. And we don't want to forget this electrical tape. What we're really just trying to do is just hold all the wires together so they don't catch on anything. One thing too, just make sure that this wire here doesn't get bound up on anything, because you need to be able to have action to those things there. You need to be able to squish up and down. And that wire, you don't want to get caught on anything. All right, we can start feeding the wires down the steering column. And be careful when you're pulling these wires so you don't shave the plastic off the wire sheath as you pull the wires through up top. And then from here, we're just going to use our cheat sheet and start matching up the wires to the plugs that we had. Should probably put this sheath on first. If you'll notice on the metal pin here, there's a little bit of a tab on that. That's going to stick out when you push this wire through. It'll keep it so it can't come back out. All right, one down. Okay, this is good to go. Now we can go ahead and plug it back in. And also on this plug, there's a little crease or a slot in here that aligns with the slot in the plug up here, so it only goes one way. And same thing with this plug. There's the way this is shaped on the inside here, it only goes one way. All right, tuck those back up inside. Let's go back up top. And with everything tucked in here, now we can go ahead and put the screws in. So we got the two screws, the two tiny screws that hold this collar in place. We'll do that first. Then we'll do these three screws that hold this plastic piece to the hub. And then we can put the turn indicator lever on here, and then we can put the wheel hub back on. And don't forget these shoulder type bolts that they connect onto the steering column and keep this thing clocked in a certain position. So there's a little tab on the top and the bottom of the steering column that these connect onto. So this needs to be on there. And then these go in place, and they lock this, and they clock this thing in a clocked position. There. Now that's in place. Now we can put this collar on. And this piece is directional, so it needs to sit this way, kind of like it's pointing to the passenger side. All right, threading in the steering lever, or the turn signal lever. All right, that's good. Now from here, one last thing, you just want to double check that these things move freely, that this wire, if you need to, you can pull this wire just a little bit, just to give you a little more play so the thing will move freely. We don't want those things binding up. And then from here, we can put our hub on. And again, if you have this style of hub, these little turn signal return levers need to be on the left-hand side. They fit in between here. This key is a good way to let you know that the key slot needs to be facing up. And so we are right about in here. Now, I should have said that when you do this, make sure your steering wheel is straight. The tires are straight when you pull this off. That's okay. We can come back and redo this if we need to. Now, before I put the steering wheel on, we do want to plug the horn in, and we want to make sure that everything is still working correctly. That way, if we don't have to take everything back apart and redo all this. So what I'm going to do is get the key, plug the battery back in, and make sure all this stuff works. All right, turn everything on. Blinker works, that's great. Horn works. I can't really turn this to make sure that's working good, but I think we're gonna be all right. Let's go ahead and put the steering wheel back on. All right, last one's in. Let's see here. All right, everything's good to go. I need to center this stuff, but that's okay. I can go back because I gotta make sure the wheels are straight. All right, that takes care of that. All right, guys, that's it. That's how you install the horn and blinker harness. Again, the hardest part was just pulling those wires out of the connectors and pushing the new ones in. You don't need to worry about if you damage the pins on the old wires because you don't use that harness anymore. So if you need to cut them and fidget with it at the bench instead of in the car, you could do that. Just making sure, obviously, that you mark which wires go into the right terminal there so that everything lines up good. And then everything goes back together like you took it apart. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Everything works. I don't have any problems now. The horn doesn't beep when I turn my steering wheel, which is great. So I'm ready to go for another drive. Guys, that's it. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. And if you subscribe, I appreciate it because it helps my channel out. And we'll see you in the next one.